Experimenting when learning Japanese. What irks me when it comes to learning Japanese is that many people seem to think that there's only one set way to go about things. You see this often in a university course, for example. The teachers are all experts in their field and should after all know the best approach to learning. I even had a student in my class who thought that a teacher should be able to teach everything in the language and that you should graduate a language learning class being fluent. With the amount of things that you need to learn in order to become fluent in the language, it should be no surprise that this is all but impossible. While it's obvious that teachers do have a lot of knowledge in their domain and have a lot to offer, you will be better off if you don't rely on their teachings as dogma. Instead, you should test the approach they offer and see if it works best for you. Whether a person learns a language or not isn't determined by how long they were in school. Most people study at least one foreign language in school, but how many end up being able to speak it, even after years of learning?
Hi! Nice to meet you! Pardon?
If the teaching methods have already been perfected, why do they work on so few people? What determines how well a person learns is instead dependent on the individual and how motivated they are to learn, as well as how much effort they put in. If you really want to learn, you will push through difficulties and work to resolve the challenges that end up in your way. This is what sets the people who succeed apart from those who fail. And this is why there are some people who manage to learn Japanese and some people who fail in the same class using the same learning material. Another common misconception is that Japanese people are the best teachers of Japanese. I disagree with this in a sense because Japanese people never really learn Japanese themselves as an adult. They will know how the language is used and can be a great resource in that regard, but they don't necessarily know how you should learn. A good example of this is the approach to learning kanji. Students of Japanese are often made to learn kanji the same way as Japanese children are. This means through rote memorization. Some kanji books made for Japanese learners even present the kanji in the same order that children learn them. Like James Heisig points out in his excellent book, Remembering the Kanji, the way children learn is not the same as the way an adult should learn. If you need to master all the common use kanji, then you should use a method that allows you to do just that in the best way possible. It was his experimentation with how to best learn kanji that made him come up with the method of learning that he outlines in his book. If he had never experimented, but instead just accepted the common knowledge of how he was supposed to learn,
what are you teaching?
Then he might not have mastered the kanji at all. Just because the method works for some people doesn't mean that it's the best way or that it's a good fit for you. Use people who've already learned Japanese as an inspiration and as a starting guide, and tweak your approach based on the results you get. Keep in mind that not all advice you see on learning Japanese will be battle tested or well thought out. There are some famous YouTubers who have lived in Japan for years who still aren't very good at speaking the language, for example.
What does katana mean? It means Japanese sword.
Take their advice with a grain of salt. This applies to the advice presented here as well. Although the methods I share worked well for me, they might not be the best fit for you. That's why you should take what works and discard the rest. Figure out what you enjoy and do more of it. The biggest factor in whether or not you succeed at learning Japanese is whether or not you continue to learn. The more you enjoy the process, the higher the likelihood that you will continue.
I can't remember when I've had a more pleasant day.
You don't have to limit your approach to what others deem useful either. If you think of something that might work, then try it. Experimenting is fun on its own and will allow you to come up with many more options to move forward. One thing that I experimented with that didn't work at all was reading to the rhythm of a metronome in order to improve my reading speed in Japanese. This ended up just sounding forced and artificial and disrupted the natural flow of the language, but it was a fun experiment and no harm was done. What worked a lot better was to record myself reading the same text as a native speaker and then listening back to see how close I could get. But I wouldn't think of doing that if I hadn't experimented. So what experiments have you come up with when it comes to learning Japanese? Write them down in the comments. Remember to like the video, subscribe, hit the bell button, and I'll see you next time.
How are you? Fine, thank you! And you!
Never give up!